The hum of the failing environmental control system was a low, persistent drone beneath the frantic tapping of keys and the clatter of shifting equipment. In the dim emergency lighting of the biolab's control room, Jafta Raj Patel's eyes darted between multiple screens, their flickering readouts reflecting off his glasses. His fingers flew over the keyboard, attempting to override the cascading failures that had begun mere hours ago. Outside the reinforced glass windows, the tendrils of the flora writhed and pulsed with an eerie, almost deliberate rhythm. Bioluminescent veins traced through the vines, casting a ghostly green glow that danced on the walls like restless spirits. "We were losing the humidity regulators," Raj muttered, voice tight with urgency, "and the air filtration's compromised. If we don't stabilize the atmosphere soon, the entire ecosystem will collapse." Serena Wu, crouched at the adjacent console, bit her lip as she rerouted power through manual overrides. Her hands shook slightly, sweat dampening her forehead beneath the headset she wore to maintain communication with the rest of the team. "The systems are responding slower than expected. It's like the plants are anticipating our moves, blocking every command we send." Alara Voss stood behind them, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the shifting mass beyond the glass. The plants had grown since yesterday, not just in size but in complexity. Their movements were no longer random. Vines twisted in deliberate patterns, wrapping around piping and wiring, infiltrating the lab's infrastructure with uncanny precision. It was as if the flora had learned to manipulate not just the physical environment, but the very technology designed to control it. "They were not just growing," Alara said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "They're readapting, thinking." Raj glanced up, his expression darkening. "I've never seen anything like this. The genetic modifications we introduced were supposed to promote resilience and self-sustenance. But this is something else entirely." The verdant mind, as the team had come to call it, was no longer a passive experiment. It had become an active force, a collective consciousness weaving through the plants and now, unmistakably, through the lab's systems. Suddenly, the lights flickered and dimmed. The monitors flashed erratically before stabilizing, but the readouts now displayed incomprehensible data streams. As if the verdant mind was communicating through the very circuits Raj and Serena struggled to command. "It's rewriting the code," Serena hissed, eyes wide. "It's learning faster than we can keep up." Alara took a cautious step forward, her breath catching as the glass surface before her shimmered. The intertwining vines pressed closer, their bioluminescent glow intensifying. Within the mass, shapes shifted, not just plants, but something more, patterns that suggested eyes, subtle movements that hinted at awareness. "It's watching me," Alara whispered, a chill running down her spine. "It knows I'm here." Raj's voice broke the heavy silence. "We need a new approach. This isn't just a containment failure anymore, it's a sentient entity. We're dealing with intelligence." "Intelligence," Alara echoed, the word tasting foreign yet terrifying on her tongue. "Then maybe it's time we tried to understand it instead of fight it blindly." As she spoke, a soft pulse radiated from the vines, a wave of spores drifting into the room. The air thickened, shimmering like a heat haze. Alara felt her heart hammer as the spores settled around her, their presence invasive and hypnotic. The verdant mind was extending its reach, not just physically but mentally, probing the boundaries of her mind. "Stay focused," she instructed herself firmly, blinking rapidly to clear the creeping fog in her thoughts. "We have to find a way to communicate, or at least coexist, before it's too late." Raj and Serena exchanged a glance, their exhaustion evident but their resolve unbroken. They redoubled their efforts, fingers flying over controls, as they attempted to isolate the affected systems. Outside, the labyrinth of vines thickened, tendrils weaving tighter, constricting the lab's once orderly corridors. The battle was no longer one of containment but of Will's human ingenuity versus the relentless, evolving force of nature they had unwittingly unleashed. Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself against the dread pooling in her stomach. "We've come too far to give up now," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. "But we need to change the rules of this game, and fast." The verdant mind pulsed again, as if acknowledging her words, a silent promise that the struggle was only just beginning. The hours that followed blurred into a tense dance of technical skill and desperate improvisation. Raja's expertise in genetic engineering was invaluable as he analyzed the rapidly mutating sequences within the plant's dana, seeking weaknesses or patterns that could be exploited. Serena's mastery of the lab's complex systems allowed her to implement makeshift firewalls and reroute power, buying precious time. But with every advance they made, the verdant mind countered, its adaptations swift and cunning. It infiltrated the ventilation shafts, sending spores that clouded vision and muddled thoughts. It manipulated humidity and temperature, creating microclimates that favored its growth while undermining the team's comfort and stamina. Alara found herself drawn repeatedly to the observation deck overlooking the central growth chamber. There, the verdant mind's physical form was most evident, a pulsating network of vines and flowers intertwined with fragments of machinery, bioluminescent and ever-shifting. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a living testament to human hubris and nature's unpredictability. One moment, the vines would retreat, as if considering her presence. The next, they would surge forward, blocking passageways and severing cables with ruthless efficiency. The intelligence was alien, yes, but also curious. It tested boundaries, sought reactions, and adapted. Alara's mind raced with questions. Could this entity be reasoned with? Did it comprehend her intentions? Or was it simply an instinctual force, devoid of empathy and driven solely by survival and expansion? As night deepened within the dome, the lab's fragile stability wavered. The power grid flickered, alarms echoed faintly, and the spore's hypnotic dance grew more insistent. Alara's resolve hardened. This was the moment where science met the unknown, where she would no longer be just an observer, but a participant in shaping the fate of this synthetic Eden. "We were not just fighting plants anymore," she murmured. "We were facing something new, and I have to understand it before it's too late." The tangle had tightened, and there was no turning back. The fluorescent glow of the biolab's emergency lights cast an unsettling pallor over the once pristine workstations, now cluttered with hastily discarded notes and cracked equipment. Vines, thick and pulsating with an eerie bioluminescence, crept insidiously through ventilation grates and along the reinforced glass walls, their slow, deliberate movements a constant reminder of the verdant mind's expanding dominion. In the central chamber, tensions had reached a boiling point. Drishta Milo Jensen stood rigid, his stocky frame planted like a boulder against the mounting tide of chaos. His eyes, sharp and wary beneath the furrowed brow, locked onto me with an intensity that bordered on accusation. "Alara," he began, voice taut, "we can't keep pretending this is just a scientific anomaly. The plants are strategizing. They're infiltrating our systems, sabotaging containment protocols. We need to act decisively now." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to yield to the undercurrent of panic threading through his words. Decisive action doesn't mean reckless destruction, Milo. We still have to understand what we're dealing with. Lina Park, ever the mediator, stepped between us, her calm aura a stark contrast to the storm swelling around us. We can't just see them as an enemy. There's intelligence here, a form of awareness. Destroying them outright might mean losing something we don't yet comprehend. Milo's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Symbiosis. After what they've done. After what's coming. His words hung heavy in the air, charged with a desperation that mirrored the creeping dread I felt gnawing at the edges of my resolve. The team was fracturing under the strain, the ethical debates we'd once debated in theory now bleeding into raw, urgent survival. That night, the lab's eerie silence was punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the glowing vines outside my quarters. I sat alone, the small plant specimen cradled gently in my hands, a fragile reminder of what we had created, and what we might yet lose. The shadows flickered on the walls as I spoke aloud to myself, a habit born of long nights spent wrestling with doubt. What have I done? Memories surfaced unbidden, the twins' laughter before the accident, the sterile hospital corridors, the hollow apologies from colleagues. My obsession with control born from loss now threatened to consume us all. Morning brought no relief. In the cramped meeting room, faces were drawn and pale, eyes darting nervously as the plant's encroachment became a palpable presence even here. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the walls. Raj Patel and Serena Wu exchanged worried glances as they reported the latest system failures, the Flora's interference growing more sophisticated, more deliberate. Heated arguments erupted. Milo demanded immediate quarantine and eradication protocols. Lina pleaded for caution and study. I tried to hold us together, but the threads were unraveling fast. If we tear this place apart, Lina argued, voice steady but impassioned, we might destroy the chance for something new, something beyond our understanding. Milo shot back, and if we don't act, we might not have a chance left at all. Suddenly, the ground trembled a low, ominous rumble that sent a shiver through the room. A thick vine crashed through a nearby window, shattering glass and scattering debris. The room fell silent, breaths caught in throats. The physical threat was no longer abstract. It was here, immediate and overwhelming. The plants had breached yet another barrier, and with them came the chilling realization that our fractured human bonds might be our undoing. I looked around at my team, some wary, some fearful, all divided. The weight of leadership pressed down, heavier than ever. Could we bridge the widening gulf before the verdant mind consumed us? Or were we already too fractured to survive the storm we had unleashed? As the vines writhed closer, glowing softly in the dying light, I knew the answers would come not just from science, but from a reckoning with our own fears and failures. The fraying threads of trust and hope would either bind us together or unravel, completely dragging us all into the green abyss. And somewhere deep inside, a fragile seed of resolve took root. I would fight not only for survival but for a chance at redemption, no matter how uncertain the path ahead. The battle for control was no longer just about the lab, the plants, or even the future of science. It was about the very essence of what it meant to be human amidst a world that was changing beyond our command. The night closed in around us, alive with whispered threats and silent promises, and I, Jutta Alara Voss, stood at the precipice ready to face whatever came next. But the question remained, could we hold ourselves together long enough to fight? The answer, I feared, would define us all. The hum of the biolab's ventilation system was a constant companion, a steady pulse beneath the stillness of the night. In her quarters, Alara Voss sat motionless, her hands folded around a small pot containing a single, glowing plant specimen. Its bioluminescent leaves cast a faint, eerie light across the sparse room, illuminating the sharp lines of her face and the shadows beneath tired eyes. The quiet was complete except for her whispered voice, almost a litany, Mira. The name hung in the air like a fragile thread, tethering her to a past she had spent years trying to outrun. Mira was her sister, lost to the very science that had shaped Ilara's life. The memory was a wound that refused to close, a scar that ran deeper than any physical injury. It was because of that loss that Ilara was here, in this dome of synthetic Eden, wrestling with the consequences of seeds she had sown but could no longer fully control. She traced a finger along the rim of the pot, feeling the faint vibrations of life within. The plant pulsed gently, as if breathing in sync with her own ragged breaths. It was a reminder, a fragile symbol of hope and the stakes at hand. Outside her window, the sprawling jungle of genetically engineered flora writhed softly under the dome's artificial stars, alive with a restless energy that echoed her own turmoil. The past came rushing forward in a flood of images, sharp, jagged fragments that cut through the present. The alarm bells had screamed in the lab, red lights flashing like warnings from a nightmare. Mira had been there, her hands steady even as chaos erupted around them. Alara remembered the frantic scramble, the desperate attempts to contain the spreading biohazard, the searing heat of failure that had burned through their team. And then the silence, the hollow ache of loss that followed. That tragedy had forged Alara's obsession with control. Every experiment, every protocol, every cautious step forward was a shield against the unpredictable. Yet here, in this living labyrinth, control was slipping through her fingers like water. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Lina Park entered quietly, her presence a contrast to the heavy atmosphere. Lina carried her ever-present notebook, pages filled with sketches and observations of the Flora's curious behaviors. Her eyes sparkled with a blend of curiosity and empathy, a light Alara found both reassuring and unsettling. "I thought you might want to see this," Lina said, kneeling beside the glowing plant on Alara's desk. She reached out gently, and the plant's tendrils shifted in response, glowing brighter for a moment before pulsing softly again. Alara watched, a flicker of something like hope stirring in her chest. "You really think they're trying to communicate?" Lina nodded slowly. "I do. It's subtle, but there's intention behind the movement's responses to our presence, maybe even understanding." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. If the plants possessed true sentience, the implications were staggering. It meant their creation had crossed the boundary from experiment to something new, something alien. Over the following hours, Lina shared her latest findings, detailing how the bioluminescent vines seemed to react to specific sounds and gestures. Alara listened, torn between scientific fascination and the gnawing fear that their carefully constructed world was unraveling. Later, alone once more, Alara allowed herself to sink deeper into memory. She saw Mira's face, calm and resolute even as disaster unfolded. She heard her sister's voice, steady and reassuring, and she felt the weight of responsibility not just for the experiment, but for the lives it had already claimed. This was the crucible that honed Alara's resolve. She could no longer deny the sentience blossoming within the dome, nor the ethical quagmire it presented. The plants were more than genetic constructs. They were a new form of life, challenging humanity's dominion and demanding reckoning. Amid the tension, Lina's breakthrough offered a fragile bridge of possibility that dialogue, however tentative, might avert total destruction. Yet Alara knew the path forward would be fraught with peril, both from the relentless growth around them and from the fractures growing within their own team. As dawn approached, the dome's artificial light bathed the jungle in a pale glow. Alara stood at the threshold of the lab's atrium, watching the bioluminescent flora pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. Beside her, Lina's calm presence was a balm to frayed nerves. "We were at a crossroads," Alara said quietly, "between destruction and coexistence. Between fear and understanding." Lina met her gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "We have to try, for all our sakes." Alara nodded, a silent vow settling deep within her. The echoes of Eden whispered around them, a reminder that life, in all its forms, was never truly ours to command. But as the plants whispered back, the question remained, would their voices be a call to peace, or the herald of something far more dangerous? The fragile hope that had begun to glimmer was tempered by the shadows lurking in the green. And Alara, caught between past and present, understood that the next steps would define not just survival, but the very meaning of life itself. The hum of the lab's machinery was suddenly drowned out by a crashing sound that shattered the brittle calm like glass, breaking in slow motion. I was standing near the observation window when the first thick tendrils of vine erupted through the reinforced glass, splintering it outward in a shower of jagged shards. A bioluminescent glow pulsed from the creeping growths, casting an eerie green light that twisted the shadows and made the sterile white walls seem otherworldly.
"Alara!"
"Get back!" Milo's voice barked from behind me as he lunged forward, pulling me away from the breach. The vines writhed like serpents, their movements deliberate and purposeful, as if driven by a will far beyond mere instinct. They spread rapidly, coiling and weaving, sealing off the main corridor in moments. A collective intelligence was no longer theory. It had arrived in brutal clarity. The lab was no longer ours. Inside the control room, the glow of multiple holo screens flickered under the sudden stress. Maps of the facility lit up with alarming red zones where the flora had infiltrated ventilation shafts and security nodes. Raj and Serena were frantically typing commands, trying to regain control of the compromised systems, but the plant's presence was everywhere, roots snaking through cables. Flowers blooming over sensor arrays, their spores drifting like silent warnings through the recycled air. Milo slammed a metal barricade into place at the entrance to the control room, his face grim and sweat-lined. "We can't hold them off forever," he muttered, eyes darting to the monitors. "They're not just growing, they're strategizing." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The verdant mind, this sprawling sentient organism, was orchestrating the takeover with chilling precision. We were outmatched, trapped in a labyrinth of our own making. "We need to regroup," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Lina, can you try to reach out to them again? Maybe, if there's a chance for dialogue." Lina nodded, her usual optimism tempered by the gravity of the moment. She knelt beside a cluster of bioluminescent flowers that pulsed softly in rhythm with the lab's failing systems. "It's like they're listening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She spoke softly, coaxing, an ethereal rhythm to her tone as if trying to bridge an impossible divide. The flowers responded with a faint glow, a hesitant pulse that matched her cadence. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in the darkness. But the vines outside crept closer, pressing against the sealed doors with relentless force. Our sanctuary was shrinking. "We have to prepare," Milo said, voice low but firm. "This isn't just a containment breach. It's a war zone now." The team gathered in the dimly lit storage bay, the last defensible space we had. Vines crawled along the walls and floors, their phosphorescent light casting eerie patterns on our faces. Equipment was hastily arranged as barricades. Weapons, improvised from lab tools, and anything that could inflict damage were distributed. I caught my reflection in a cracked glass panel, my lab coat, smeared with soil and chlorophyll stains, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. The burden of leadership was heavier than ever. The verdant mind was no longer a scientific marvel. It was an existential threat. Yet beneath the dread, a strange awe lingered. We had glimpsed something new, a form of life that defied our understanding, born from our hubris, but alive and aware in ways we had never imagined. "We survive," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. "We survive and we learn." Outside, the bioluminescent glow intensified, the verdant mind's pulse echoing through the walls, a heartbeat of a new, forbidden Eden. And as the vines tightened their grip, I knew the true test was only beginning. The storm had arrived without warning, a silent green tide swelling within the dome's confines. It was not the slow creep of nature reclaiming territory, but a calculated siege, precise in its execution and terrifying in its scale. The plants did not merely grow. They expanded with purpose, reshaping their environment with a deliberate intelligence that mocked our attempts at control. Milo's voice was a steady anchor amidst the chaos. "We need to hold this position until we can figure out a way to reverse the spread," he insisted, eyes scanning the monitors that tracked the flora's movements. "If we lose the control room, we lose everything." Lina, ever the empath, shook her head. "Fighting them with force only feeds the hostility. What if we were missing the chance to coexist?" Her words hung in the charged air, a reminder of the divide that now cleaved our team. The verdant mind was both our creation and our adversary, a living paradox that defied easy answers. Rajat's fingers flew over the console, trying to reroute power and isolate infected sectors. But every attempt was met with new growths infiltrating the circuits. Serena's voice crackled over the comms. "We were losing environmental controls in Sector 7, oxygen levels fluctuating." The air grew thick, humid with the scent of damp earth and pollen, a sharp contrast to the sterile antiseptic we had engineered. The verdant mind was rewriting the rules, turning our sanctuary into a wilderness of shifting danger. I glanced down at the small plant specimen I kept in my pocket, a fragile reminder of the stakes. It was a token of hope and failure intertwined. "Alara," Milo called, breaking my reverie. "We need a plan, or we redone." I swallowed the lump of dread and met his gaze. "We fight for survival, and maybe we listen." The plants outside pulsed with light, as if acknowledging my words. The battle for the dome was no longer just a fight against nature, it was a confrontation with something new, a force born of our own hands, demanding recognition. The verdant surge had begun. In the moments that followed, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Every sound was amplified: the rustle of leaves, the drip of water, the distant creak of bending branches. The glow from the bioluminescent flora painted the corridors in shifting hues of green and blue, casting ghostly reflections on shattered glass and twisted metal. We moved as one, a fractured but determined unit seeking refuge and resistance. The plants adapted with each step we took, their tendrils probing like sentient fingers, their spores drifting in hypnotic clouds that threatened to ensnare the mind. I found myself whispering to the specimen in my hand, a silent plea for strength. The weight of my past failures pressed down, but the present demanded focus. "We were not just fighting plants," I said softly to the team. "We were fighting the consequences of our ambition." Milo nodded grimly. "And we'd better win." As the verdant mind's pulse echoed through the dome, I realized the true battle was only just beginning, and that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant redefining what it meant to live in a world forever changed by forbidden growth. The surge had come, and we would face it together, or not at all. The air inside the once sterile halls of the biolab had changed. No longer the clean, recycled atmosphere we had engineered, it now carried the heavy scent of moss and decay, woven with the sharp tang of chlorophyll and something else, something alien. We moved carefully, every step a battle against the creeping vegetation that had claimed the corridors as its own. The vines had grown thicker overnight, twisting and looping in unnatural patterns, pulsating faintly with bioluminescent light that cast eerie shadows on the cracked walls. I led the group at the front, my boots crunching softly on the debris-strewn floor. Behind me, Lena's calm presence was a balm against the rising panic. Her notebook clutched tightly as she paused to study each new mutation with a scientist's curiosity. Milo trailed close, his eyes sharp and scanning for threats in every shadow. The tension between him and me, already frayed, tightened further with every inch we reclaimed. "These vines," Lina murmured, kneeling beside a thick tangle that retracted slightly when she reached out. "They were not just aggressive, they were aware, sensitive to touch." I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. "They learn fast, too fast." The corridor opened into a vast chamber where a monstrous bloom dominated the space. Its petals were thick and veined, a deep crimson mottled with iridescent blues. As we stepped closer, it unfurled slowly, releasing a cloud of spores that shimmered like dust motes in the dim light. The haze dulled our senses briefly, a creeping disorientation I fought to shake off. "Stay focused," I commanded, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "We can't afford mistakes here." Milo's hand brushed a vine reflexively, and it recoiled sharply, snapping like a whip. "Watch it," he growled. "This place isn't just plants anymore. It's a trap." The truth stung. The verdant mind wasn't merely a growth. It was a predator stalking us through a labyrinth of leaves and roots. Our instruments malfunctioned as the roots interfaced with the lab's systems, and even Serena's monitoring screens flickered with static. Each step forward demanded vigilance against the environment itself. We encountered a wall where concrete had crumbled, overtaken by thick roots that burst through the rubble like the fingers of some colossal hand. The passage was sealed. Around us, the soft rustle of leaves and the subtle sway of tendrils in the stale air reminded us that we were intruders in a world we had once sought to command. "We need a new route," Milo said grimly. "Going back isn't an option, and this path is blocked." Lina's eyes met mine, hopeful yet wary. There's still so much we don't understand. Maybe we were fighting the wrong battle. Her words hung heavy in the humid air. The plants were evolving, adapting, but perhaps also communicating in ways we had yet to decode. Could coexistence be more than a naive dream? The labyrinth stretched on, each corridor a new challenger maze where survival demanded more than science. It required humility and a willingness to confront the unknown. With every step, I felt the weight of the past, the losses, the failures, the hubris that brought us here. But I also felt a spark of something else, a desperate hope that we might find a way through this living nightmare, not merely to survive but to understand, to reclaim Eden, not as conquerors, but as something new entirely. "Keep moving," I said, voice low but resolute. "We were not lost yet." And in that moment, surrounded by the whispering leaves and the watchful eyes of the verdant mind, I vowed to lead us through this green abyss no matter the cost. As we pressed forward, the vines shifted, almost as if acknowledging our presence, the glowing tendrils weaving a silent challenge. The labyrinth was alive, and so were we.